Hello, everybody. We are in Module 7, and this is officially week 4. And in Module 7, we're going to be covering Chapter 8, which is Development Across the Lifespan. Now, this chapter covers a lot of material, so I'm going to just try to break it down a little bit for you. Just some key concepts and some things to be paying attention to. So here is your to-do list for the module. In terms of the objectives, as you can see, again, there's a lot of material here. Typically, this class, if you take it, it's kind of broken up into 3. You would typically take child development, then you would take adolescent development, and then adult development and aging. This chapter here kind of takes all 3 of those areas and puts it into one chapter. So it is a lot, but I find that this is an interesting chapter for a lot of students, especially if you're going into the healthcare setting or education, if you're going to be working with kids in any way, shape, or form. So vital to understand child, adolescent development, as well as adult development in many regards, especially if you're going to be a therapist or working with married couples or families or anything like that. So the first part of the chapter starts out talking about what kinds of research methods are used to study development. So if we're trying to learn how people develop over time, what kinds of research designs would be effective for doing that? Would we look at one or more people, the same people across their entire lifespan, which would be more of a longitudinal study, or would we look at different people cross-sectionally and compare them with one another, being different age groups at the same time? And we can do so in a number of ways. So I really want you guys to become familiar with some of those research methodologies and sort of what the advantages and disadvantages are of each. And kind of embedded in there, it's going to talk a little bit about sort of what it's been called in the past, which is the nature-nurture debate. You know, how much does our heredity, our biology, our DNA contribute to who we are and how we develop versus environmental factors? It really isn't a debate anymore. More it is, you know, in what ways might heredity play more of a role than environmental factors or vice versa. But what we've seen typically is that both contribute pretty importantly to development, just in different ways. So I'm going to take a look at that. You're going to be looking at some specifics of biology like chromosomes, genes, traits. The chapter is going to talk specifically about some disorders that can happen all the way from, the inception process all the way to birth and after, and what those disorders would look like, what would happen. So a little bit of genetics in there, which is interesting, a little bit of biology, but nothing too crazy and specific. Going to talk also about prenatal development. So this is development of the fetus, what can happen while a woman is pregnant that might harm the fetus, so hazards in prenatal development, what specifically those are, what are the big ones that we kind of pay attention to and warn pregnant mothers about to be careful, things that can be avoided pretty much. Then we're going to get into the physical and sensory changes that take place in early infancy and childhood. This is also going to tag on this topic here to the discussion for the week. So pay attention when you're reading this part of the chapter, as you might want to use some of that material in your discussion post. And then from then on, it starts to get into some theories of cognitive development. So you're going to be looking at Piaget, who discusses cognitive development. We're going to be looking at Erik Erikson, who looks at psychosocial development, and then also a little bit of moral development from Kohlberg. Those are kind of like the 3 primary theorists, psychologists that we're going to be examining throughout this chapter. So embedded in there are different things about gender, gender roles, how those develop, how that might change during adolescence. Lots going on in adolescence, breaking down sort of those stages for you. So anything that's physical, anything that's cognitive, and then definitely lots of time spent on the psychosocial concerns. So how are, kids, young kids, school-age kids, and on up, developing together in regards to one another in a social aspect? How does that affect their psyche? Positive, negative, things like that. And then the very last part of the chapter is what kind of really then gets into adult development and aging, which talks about sort of the process of aging, what happens, cognitively for adults as they age, especially as they become elderly, and they're at risk for different developmental deficits that could affect memory, like Alzheimer's disease or any kinds of dementia. We'll talk a little bit about that. And then end with the stages of death and dying, basically Kubler-Ross's research and what some criticisms were of that, but then also what we gained in understanding, the process of dying. Usually, a lot of families, when they're dealing with death, it's not necessarily someone dying suddenly. A lot of times dying is a process for families. They know it's coming. Someone is sick, someone is ill, it takes time. And so there are stages that the person who is ill goes through, as well as the family members, and these are important stages in the grieving process. So that's explained a little bit. So I hope that helps, just give you an overall kind of view of what the chapter is going to cover. The videos this week are going to be in episode 9 of Lifespan Development. That's in my psych lab. So all those videos are good for this week. Your lecture slides are here. And then here's the discussion for Module 7. And it has to do with Kohlberg's stages of moral development. So again, please feel free to go back up into the main chapter and see where it talks about morality and the development of it, and insert that into your discussion here, because that's going to help bolster your viewpoints. It's going to help show that you did the reading and that you're able to examine it a little bit deeper and put your thought into it. Specifically, you're going to be talking a lot about this last level of moral development, which is stage 6. And Kohlberg said not everyone gets there. Well, why? Why did he say that? What was his reasoning? What's so special about this stage that makes it hard for everyone to attain? Give examples, cite sources, do all of that. One of the biggest criticisms of Kohlberg's work was that all the people he studied, when he was curious about morality and how do we develop morals, he studied them by proposing certain moral dilemmas. So what would you do if type of scenarios? And of course, the response that you're going to get to that is very different than if you're actually in the moral dilemma in real life and going through it. You may respond in a very different way that you never thought you would if just asked to ponder it. So it's a very different process, and that was kind of the main criticism he got. So I kind of want you guys thinking out of the box here, thinking about, okay, if I really wanted to study morality in real life, like capture how people develop their morals and values, how would I go about studying that? What would I do? What type of research design would help me to answer that question? Would I study the same people over their lifespan, and as they go through actual moral dilemmas, would I study that as they're doing that? Or would I try to survey people and ask them about experiences they've had? There's so many different ways that you could go about this. And so I feel like after you've done your readings for this Hawk reading, and you've done your Module 7 readings, you'll have a better idea of sort of what some of those research designs might look like that would help you study that. And if we go back up to the learning objectives here, remember at the very beginning of the chapter, it talks about research methods used to study development. So maybe revisit that and try to tie that into how you would study morality in real life. Okay, and then the last part of this module is your quiz number 7, and that wraps up the module. And don't forget to listen to the next podcast for module 8. Thanks, everyone.